Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sydney Bowman, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at NewCloud Networks. Thank you all for attending the Ransomware Preparedness and Recovery webinar brought to you by NewCloud Networks and Veeam. Today we're going to hear from Ian Eldridge, the NewCloud Networks Sales Manager, and Matt Price, the Veeam Solutions Engineer. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, please just use the chat feature at the top of your screen, and all questions will be addressed at the end. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ian Eldridge. Ian?
Great. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today as we discuss ransomware and what it is and ways to recover from it. So just a quick overview and summary, again, about what we're going to chat about today. I know some of the folks on the phone here are familiar with NewCloud Networks and are perhaps even customers of ours, but there are quite a few that perhaps don't know who we are. So we're going to take a little bit of time to do a quick overview of NewCloud Networks, and then I'm going to pass it off to Matt Price over at Veeam, who is going to walk you guys through what ransomware is from a 10,000-foot level, how to be prepared for it, and more importantly, how to recover from it if it does happen. At the end of the day, there are so many different ways of protection against ransomware, but there's also so many different vectors of attack. It can come in through email, it can come in through social engineering attacks, it can come in through a USB drive, and unfortunately, despite all these ways to block it, it still happens. It's still very possible for people to get hacked. So the NewCloud Networks and Veeam solution that we're going to really highlight today is how to recover from an attack if it happens and ensure that you don't lose any data and that you don't become a victim of one of these piracy attacks. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the NewCloud Networks overview. NewCloud Networks is a 29-year-old company. So we've been around for a very long time, and we are a nationwide provider of custom cloud computing and cloud communications solutions. So our big value add to the customer, to the end user, and all of our partners is that we do everything. We can do hybrid cloud, desktop as a service, virtual private data center, backup and disaster recovery. We also provide MPLS and hosted PBX services. We also do IT managed services. So every product that we offer full support on the back end. And we've got over 20,000 subscribers on our network and over 2,500 customers. And our big focus is on mid-enterprise companies, mostly businesses that have enterprise-like requirements and enterprise-like needs, but not necessarily the enterprise-like budget. And that's really where we shine, because our custom solutions enable folks to get exactly what they need and not be forced into a larger packaged solution where they're going to end up with resources or services that really are just too much for them and that they are going to pay for something they don't need. Like any cloud and data center company, we've got a tremendous focus on redundancy and security. We spend millions upon millions of dollars around our hardware security, our software, our auditing reports. Our data centers are HIPAA and PCI and SOC 2 Type 1 compliant. And for some companies, they might not have personal health care information. It might not apply to them, but we always throw that out there because it means we take our data security and data protection extremely seriously. We meet with a lot of C-level people and a lot of IT directors and managers all the time, and they always say the number one thing that keeps them up at night is security. So obviously for them to be able to host their data or even their backups somewhere, they want to make sure that it's going to be secure. This is our nationwide network. So our headquarters and where the company was founded is here in Denver, Colorado. And we also have 10 data centers around the country today as well. This network is built for backup and disaster recovery. And what that means is in the world of BDR, or backup and disaster recovery, it's very important to have your data be far enough away from your production site so that if there is a natural disaster, for example, like if you're on the West Coast, an earthquake, if you're on the East Coast, a hurricane, you don't want your backups to be, worst case scenario in the same building or even in the same town, because if there's a true natural disaster, it could take down both your production and your backup. So best practice is to have your backup and disaster recovery site be 500 miles away from production. Now, something we're going to focus on today is, in the world of disaster recovery, disasters don't have to be of the natural form. So they're not always earthquakes, they're not always hurricanes, and especially if you're in the same part of the country we are, maybe in Denver and Phoenix, there really aren't too many natural disasters here, which makes it a popular place for data centers to host cloud environments of backup and disaster recovery. But in this day and age, disaster comes in many forms. It can come in ransomware, it can come in attacks, and that's really what we're focusing on today. But coming back to our map here, the big differentiator we have against some other cloud providers out there is this network. So we privately own and operate the network. We control the latency between each data center. It runs on 10 gigabit per second MPLS. That is not shared with anybody else. It's our network. It's not the open internet. And the importance of controlling that latency is ensuring that when a customer tests their DR site, or actually has to use their DR site in worst case scenario, that we control the latency so that it's actually usable. The example I'll give is if there's a customer that's on the West Coast in San Francisco, it wouldn't be too ideal to put their DR site in New York, because if you add up all those legs, the latency is going to be pretty high. And in the world of cloud computing, high latency can make or break an environment. So if you'll notice on the map here, no two locations have more than 25 milliseconds between them. And to get to the customer site, we can either provide an MPLS circuit, a leg off of our MPLS network here, or we can provide software-defined wide area networking to control the latency and provide really good connection into our cloud. So a quick breakdown of what our products and services entail. Cloud is a pretty ambiguous term, so we're going to define it a little bit here. Network as a service, as shown on the previous slide, we provide MPLS services and software-defined wide area networking services around the country. Hosted PBX, unified communications as a service, so everything from physical phones, soft phones, instant messaging, screen sharing, everything that falls into that realm as well. Backup and disaster recovery as a service, that's a big one. I get asked all the time what our most popular product is and what we sell the most of, and it's by far backup and disaster recovery as a service. Because with any of the services that we sell in some way, shape, or form, we're going to be including backup and disaster recovery in there because redundancy is key. You never want to have a single point of failure. Desktop as a service, or virtual desktops, that goes hand in hand with the next product, which is virtual private data center, essentially hosting of customers' infrastructure, production cloud environments. And again, backup and disaster recovery is always going to be bundled in with virtual private data center so that if something were to happen, we've got a site that we can stand our customers up in. And again, just to kind of continuously beat on the thread of what we're going to be talking about today is ransomware. At the end of the day, when I talk to customers, they say, well, hey, if I'm in your data center, Ian, you got my cloud's in your data center, you've got redundant internet, you've got redundant power, you've got diesel generators, you've got all this beefy stuff. Why do I have to worry about disaster recovery? Why would I? Nothing's ever going to happen to your data center, it sounds like. And ransomware is a real threat. It can come in from many different vectors, like we mentioned, and Matt's going to go into a lot more detail about what those vectors are. And that's why it's important that even when you're in a very highly secure facility, you can still get attacked, and it's important to have backups and disaster recoveries in place. So to drill in a little bit further on what our backup and disaster recovery and Veeam offerings are, we offer Veeam Cloud Connect Backup, which we can send customers on-premises backups into any of our data centers, so that if for customers that are currently using Veeam today. Veeam Cloud Connect Replication or Disaster Recovery, which we can send replication jobs into our data centers and spin VMs up as needed. And we're going to go into a lot more details into what those entail later on here. And now disaster recovery is also a very broad statement, so it goes above and beyond just providing the infrastructure. Before even jumping into that, it's important to understand what you have on site and what your backup and disaster recovery infrastructure looks like today. So we provide assessments where we can come in, look at what you guys have currently, do an audit, make some recommendations, and then lastly, doing actual preparation, right? What goes above and beyond us just providing infrastructure? We need to enable that you guys have your networking in place, that you have firewalls and IP addresses and subnets all set up. These are very important factors that go above and beyond just providing the infrastructure to stand VMs up in, and we provide full services to help with all of these. So I'm going to take this opportunity to pass the controls off to Matt Price over at Veeam.
Thank you very much, Ian. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's call with NewCloud. We're so excited that everyone is here today to learn more about ransomware and the Veeam strategy, along with NewCloud, to make you prepared and know exactly how to respond if you actually are hit with ransomware. So the first thing that we just want to do, and I would assume that most of you that are here today at least have some idea behind what ransomware is, but let's just review at a high level exactly what we're talking about. And, essentially, just like Ian mentioned, there are several different ways that you can actually be impacted by ransomware. There's all kinds of different spreading protocols. You've got cryptovirology now. You've got, leaks that can come in via email that was mentioned. You've got, unsecured drives like USBs. And generally the idea is when ransomware does strike, it's at least intended to hit data that you feel is very important that you need to have recovered, such as your files, your emails, things of this extent. Now, every vertical is technically exposed to ransomware, right? It's not like they focus on one key area of the business, whether you're financial, your education, government. It really doesn't matter. A VM is a VM no matter who's actually managing it. So one of the things that, we really look at here at Veeam is how to make sure that not only if you are hit, you know how to recover, but let's just review some of the ways that you could be hit. Trojans, probably most of you have heard this. It's been around forever. Basically, you've got the removable media that we talked about. Very interesting study that was done by Google talking about just leaving USB drives and how many people would actually pick those up and plug them into a computer, having no idea what's actually on that USB drive. You've got social media engineering that was mentioned earlier. And now, even more scary, ransomware as a service. Now, another thing that's important to note, Windows is certainly still a huge market share in the business sector, but all systems can potentially be exposed. So not only Windows, you've got ransomware out there specifically for Linux, also specifically for Mac OS. So if you guys, you've probably heard of the WannaCry, the Petyas. You've also got Linux Kill Disk, you've got FileCoder. So there's been ransomware, the point is, in many different sectors of business, whether it's OS, whether it's the way that you get infected, it's out there. It is a very real threat. So one of the things that, we want to make sure that you're prepared and you actually know how Veeam can help with this strategy along with NewCloud is, how to prepare and make sure that if you are hit with ransomware, you don't have to pay the ransom. And that's the ultimate goal, right? If you are infected, you've got to have some way to recover that data without literally having to pay potentially millions of dollars to get that back. So a few of these are basic housekeeping notes that you should be doing anyway as far as best practices inside your business. Keep everything up to date. Windows is all the time coming out with updates to patch security loopholes that are found. Same thing with your antivirus softwares. If you do run antivirus, obviously make sure you've got the latest patches and definitions installed. Also, staff training. Again, going back to that study. And again, there is going to be the human variable. You can't control what everybody does at all times, hence why you need to be prepared with backup data. But to some extent, train your staff on don't just open rogue links that come in via emails. Don't just grab a USB drive that you found in the mall and plug it into your corporate computer and network. There's some things that need to be emphasized from an IT perspective, but the things that we're going to focus on are number 4 and 5. How that we can make sure that you're prepared by taking proper backups and preparing yourself for, proper disaster recovery protocols. So one of the first things that's important to note is you want to make sure that you are, in fact, protected. And, one of the common things that we find when we go in with Veeam is, oftentimes, especially in larger environments, there are going to be workloads and VMs that slip through the cracks of your data protection strategy. So for an example, if you run a VMware or you run a Hyper-V infrastructure, maybe you're a large environment and you've got 200 plus virtual machines. It is possible that a few of those VMs are missed. Maybe the job architecture isn't set up in such a way to grab those. So one of the things that Veeam has, and this goes back to what Ian was talking about as far as an assessment to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities, we actually have inside of our Veeam 1 monitoring and reporting solution a way to run a protected VMs report. The protected VMs report, just to give you an idea, will actually cross-reference all the active virtual machines that are registered in your vSphere or Hyper-V inventory, and actually cross-reference that with an RPO variable that you can specify, whether your company policy is to have 7 days, 14 days, a month, 6 months. You enter this variable, and it will cross-reference those databases to see if any VM has fell through the cracks. Now, it could be an expected outcome, right? It could be a brand new VM you just deployed. It hasn't been backed up adequately to hit that RPO, but at least you know about it. It's on this report. And obviously, there could be the other side of the variable where the VM has been there for 3 years and it was simply overlooked. So you would hate for that particular VM to be hit with ransomware only to find out you never had a backup of it after you were already infected. So that's one of the things that Veeam 1 can really help with. Now, there's certainly several different things from a Veeam technology and Veeam product portfolio that all play into ransomware. We're going to mention a few of these, and at the end, we're also going to give you guys some more information on how to take a deeper look into the different products that Veeam offers, because certainly we could spend all afternoon talking about everything Veeam can do. So we're just hitting this at a high level, specifically focusing on key areas of the product that can help you protect against ransomware infestation. Now, the other thing that's important to note, now you guys have probably heard the 3-2-1 strategy. And, that simply states 3 different copies of your overall media. Now, this could be production counting as 1 on, say, your production SAN. This can be 1 backup on 2 different media types, such as a disk and a tape, maybe a disk, a tape, and off-site, maybe with Cloud Connect. And we'll get into what Cloud Connect offers in a moment. 1 absolutely needs to be off-site. Now, that's the basic strategy. That's the basic best practice that Veeam has been abiding by for several years now. Now, we've enhanced that. Before we added the offline, if you see this graphic, before we added that second one, the goal was to get to 0. And the whole idea of the 0 in this, it used to be 3-2-1-0, was to verify that the backups that you've saved on the 2 media types and the 1 being off-site were without error. And we'll get into how Veeam can automate the testing of your backups to ensure recoverability, but there's no point of diversifying backups that are corrupted, right? So the whole idea is before you start distributing these backups off-site, onto tape, you first want to verify that they're recoverable so that you know what is being distributed is a valid backup, should you need to leverage it. Now, when we added the second one, so 3-2-1-1-0 now you absolutely need one that is offline in addition to necessarily being off-site, right? And another common term for this that we'll re-emphasize later is air-gapped. So the whole idea, especially with ransomware, you need at least 1 backup that is not readily accessible on your LAN or some easy target for ransomware or other viruses to hit. So tape is a perfect example that can actually satisfy the off-site and the offline. But Cloud Connect offers some very, very nice assets around that we're going to get into here in just a moment. Now, one of the things to mention is how Veeam helps you distribute these backups to remote targets as well as remote locations. And we just picked one of the job types here to touch on because the backup copy job offers several different advantages when you look at off-siting data as well as long-term archival and encryption. So the first thing to know about the backup copy job is it does not impact production. We aren't going back to your production workloads, backing up the same thing twice. Much like the name infers, it's taking a backup that you've already created on your preliminary repository. You've already verified that backup is recoverable, which we'll get into. Now you want to take that and resynthesize it at another disk-based location. Now, the first and obvious choice is to get this off-site because you already have it on-site with your initial repository. So the backup copy job helps facilitate Cloud Connect, which we'll get into in a moment. But the other thing that's important with a backup copy as it pertains to off-site is once you get the first backup created at the destination, let's say it's at the NewCloud data center with Cloud Connect, once the first full is done, it only ever has to send incrementals over the wire, enabling you to still build additional fulls at the target side. So where this can come in handy is rather than having, all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, where you have one full and several incrementals as part of the chain, if anything happened to that one full, those incrementals, now are not recoverable, right? Because the full that they tied back to is, say, invalid. So one of the things that the backup copy enables is a grandfather, father, son based retention option. So you can actually go into Veeam and say, at my offsite destination, I want to keep X number of weeklies, monthlies, quarterlies, and yearlies for not only resiliency, but long-term archival requirements, perhaps based on your business policy, right, or business rules. And the beauty of the backup copy is not only can it satisfy that, but it can synthesize those fulls at the target side without having to circumvent the wire, sending another full data set over that pipe. Now, when you look at this as it pertains to Cloud Connect, let me first explain what Cloud Connect does. So Cloud Connect is a protocol that Veeam developed that enables service providers, exactly like NewCloud, to actually enable a cloud-based target for their Veeam customers without the necessity of a VPN connection. So the way the Cloud Connect protocol operates, it's only recognizable inside the Veeam software. It's not like it's a mapped drive in Windows, which would certainly be a vulnerability. We establish an SSL connection over the WAN and talk to a cloud gateway at the target side. Now, this is encrypted with SSL, but you can take that a step further and actually encrypt your backup data using AES-256, and that's Veeam-powered encryption, and that can be at rest and in flight and, source to target intact all the way across that data stream. So the whole idea, if security is of the utmost importance, maybe you've got, compliances that you have to abide by, and encryption is one of those, that's easy for Veeam to implement source to target. Now, the other nice thing about Cloud Connect is, let's say your upstream bandwidth connection to the WAN is not the greatest. Maybe you're in an area where you can only get a 20 meg pipe or a 10 meg pipe. Veeam also offers WAN acceleration. So this can be something added on if you need to optimize that data transfer from your site to NewCloud. And the way the WAN accelerator works in Veeam, just to give you guys some background, is when we initially do our backups, we're doing deduplication and compression, but we're doing it per job, right? Think about it like a silo. Well, if you've got 10 Veeam jobs and you're pulling a few VMs from each of those jobs to send to NewCloud, the WAN accelerator then enables you to do global variable block dedupe with blocks of data that they already have at their side. So if we locate any duplicates, those data packets don't have to be sent over the wire. We can simply use those blocks at the target end to re-inject, saving you guys a ton of time sending your backup data up to the cloud. And it's an optional thing, right? It depends on what your circuit bandwidth looks like, but it's a very easy option to add on. Now, that's on the backup piece, but let's not forget about replication. And there's two defined levels of disaster recovery, at least the way I see it, right? Backups are designed for, the worst case scenario. If you had to recover from your data, your on-site backups are either corrupted, maybe they're not even available, maybe you had a larger issue. But with simply having backups in the cloud, your downtime is going to exist. It's not going to be a one-click failover like if you had a ready-to-go DR facility. It's simply designed for that worst-case scenario recovery option. When you look at replication, the story changes. The whole idea with Cloud Connect replication is not only can you have the long-term backup data sitting in NewCloud data center, sitting on their storage, maybe sitting encrypted because you enabled that source side, but you can now actually work with them, carve up exactly what type of compute you might need to actually replicate the VM into their data center and have a ready-to-go offline copy of whatever VMs are critical sitting right there in inventory ready to be turned on. So when you look at minimizing downtime to the utmost, replication provides failover. It also provides Delta Sync failback, where instead of failing everything back from, say, NewCloud, you can fail back just change blocks, right? So a much quicker turnaround time. Now, another interesting concept around replication, you can still use WAN acceleration to send that data there much more efficiently, but there are also two different levels of failover that you can leverage. You can do a full site, which is your traditional failover, right? Something at your main office has catastrophically failed. Maybe you've had a SAN failure, everything is corrupted, everything's infected. You've got to failover and temporarily run your whole business out of the NewCloud data center. That's a full site. But we also support partial failover. So let's say, for an example, you only have maybe a certain VLAN, that was in your network got compromised, and you have a few others that are just fine. You can actually fail over just that subset of whatever VMs that were compromised, run those in NewCloud Data Center, and Veeam actually builds a layer 2 LAN extension between your site and their site, so you actually have transparent networking between the two locations. And, based on what Ian's talking about with the extremely low bandwidth, you can actually operate that way until you're able to repair, or extremely low latency, you can actually operate that way until you're able to repair whatever happened at the source and then fail back those workloads. So it actually gives you a whole different dynamic when you talk about disaster recovery, and it's a really, pay-as-you-need type service. You can do Cloud Connect backup, Cloud Connect replication, or there's certainly use cases to quantify both. Okay? So that's the whole idea around Cloud Connect. And one of the things that we'll get to when we circle back to the whole air gap topic is, remember, Cloud Connect is a Veeam protocol. It's not a CIF share, it's not SMB, it's not an NFS target, it's not something like an iSCSI connection, it's not anything that you could browse in Windows and see your target. It's only recognizable and accessible through the Veeam software. And, the ransomware that we're talking about today, the WannaCries, and all these others that can go out and ping Active Directory and do a discovery, they're not going to be able to discover your Cloud Connect targets, which actually enables that Cloud Connect to play that role of not only the off-site, but the offline as well. Now let's talk about a few other tips. And some of these are best practices to give you guys some additional levels of preparedness to try to avoid the infection of ransomware. A physical server. So when you're looking at deploying Veeam, we support both physical and virtual deployments. But one, nice asset, if you do have a physical machine, you can literally install Veeam on it, leave it totally off the domain, use local credentials versus domain credentials, just to help with that whole Active Directory Discover potential issue, right? You can also use direct attached storage versus, say, a NAS. You can actually directly connect the repository to this physical server, again, in an effort to avoid any type of auto-discovery. You can also implement some sort of, wake on LAN. If you want to have this machine powered off only when it's time to do backup, should it turn on, you can build that in with some automation. Another key concept here is when we talk about passwords, please, for everything, don't use the same password globally. You need to create different passwords, strong passwords. If you have to remember these, figure out some other way offline to remember the passwords. But certainly a strong user password matrix is important, especially with auto-discovery. Okay, Cloud Connect credentials are going to be provided from NewCloud, so they're already going to meet, the requirements that they put in place for, password security. Same thing with, SMB shares. Try to break up those credentials. And these are common best practices, honestly, from a network integrity perspective and a business security standpoint. These are some things that you want to take into consideration, not just for ransomware, but many other potential issues where you just want that secure backbone. Now, another great option with Veeam is we support different types of repositories. So for those of you who are familiar with the software, we can back up to a Windows server with any type of local disk, whether it's iSCSI, direct attached, internal, DAS, local, whatever. We can also back up to a Linux machine. So if you've got the same concept, direct attached, internal, or maybe mounted NFS, we can back up through a Linux machine. So if you're actually looking to, further improve your resiliency, you might implement mixed repositories even on site. So rather than dumping everything to a Windows server, maybe break it up and have some Linux repositories. Now, another thing we mentioned earlier, VLAN segmentation. This is another huge one. If you do have your environment broken off on different VLANs, this is going to help with that whole auto-discovery potential loophole or potential vulnerability. This is something, again, that would be a good idea in every environment, just to try to create some separation, specifically as it pertains to ransomware and the whole worm methodology that's coming out, where it can get into one sector of the environment and do auto discoveries and figure out a way to discover additional parts of your infrastructure to infect. VLAN segmentation is going only to prevent that even further, to help break that apart into different logical networks. Now, air-gapped. So this goes back to really the most important part. There's no ransomware that's going to infect a tape. If a tape is in our mountain, it's safe, right? So the whole idea with Cloud Connect, like I said earlier, this is a huge asset that works in your favor, because not only is it off-site, that certainly creates a division, but it's also only accessible through the Veeam interface and console and software. So that adds another layer of protection with the offline in the 32110. So, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, guys, but at the end of the day, it's how do you get your data back so you don't have to do this very first option, right? Nobody wants to actually have to pay to unlock their data. That's why, hopefully, they paid for the right backup solution. So when you look at Veeam, we're going to be focusing on ways that you can recover data if everything else has failed we've already talked about. So if you've put all these measures in place, you've got all these guardrails and firewalls and VLANs, you've got all these passwords that are broken apart, and you still, unfortunately, have been hit with ransomware, even if it's on a small subset of the environment. If you've done, and followed some of the steps that we've given you earlier with best practices from Veeam to make sure you're backed up, make sure you verified your backups, we will be able to recover that data for you. And certainly, if you ever get hit with ransomware, please contact the authorities. Don't just do a Veeam restore and just shoo it under the rug. It needs to be reported so others don't get impacted as well. So let's talk about a couple options. So if ransomware hits, and let's say, for an example, it infects a few of the VMs, maybe your file server, maybe your Exchange server, SQL, whatever houses your actual mission-critical data. There are several different ways as well as levels to not only make sure that the data is recoverable before you start sending it off-site, but also granularity. You can actually go in and get exactly what item you need from any Veeam backup that you verified as recoverable without having to worry about pushing and pulling the entire size of the cumulative backup, which could be hundreds of gigs into the terabyte range. So we talked about earlier how to verify that your backups are recoverable before you start sending them off-site. Now, one of the ways that we do this is in conjunction with our on-demand sandbox as well as our Sure Backup feature. And I don't know, there's probably some on the call that are familiar with Veeam, probably some that are not. The on-demand sandbox in our software enables you to create a fenced-off, isolated network that does not have any impact on production. There's no IP conflicts. There's no DNS issues when you actually fire up VMs inside this isolated lab. And the original design behind the on-demand or the virtual lab was to enable Veeam Sure Backup. So let me give you guys an example. Let's say you've got 50 virtual machines and Windows goes through and maybe your WSUS server pushes an update. Well, let's say only 25 of those 50 VMs get rebooted, right? So when Veeam goes through and we back up those servers, everything is going to show perfectly fine. All your checksums, your integrity checks, everything is going to be green across the board, because the reality is until you restart that system, many of those updates are just sitting there waiting. They're pending. They haven't been applied yet. So from a block level perspective and an application perspective, the VM is still fine. So the last time that you want to learn that maybe one of those updates caused things to go sideways is the next day when you come in and the server has failed, right? Or maybe the next day you come in and you found out you've been hit with ransomware. So you go to try to do a recovery and you get a blue screen, or you have registry corruption. Bad design, and that's a bad scenario. And we realized this several years ago. So we built this whole concept called the on-demand, sandbox with our virtual lab and Sure Backup. Now, what Sure Backup does is after you have created your initial backup, this is talking about your very first landing target disk on site, we can then go in behind that using this isolated network that we're talking about, and we can power on these virtual machines from the Veeam backups that we've just built to make sure that they're not only bootable, but they respond as they're supposed to. So for an example, we fire them up, we make sure a logon prompt is reached, we do a ping test, we do a heartbeat check, we can even run custom script verification to make sure certain ports are responding properly based on workload. Now, when all this is done, we can power down those VMs and provide you an audit trail report so that you actually have documentation that you're testing those backups regularly for recoverability purposes. Now, once you've done Sure Backup and you get that report that everything is recoverable, you know at that point in time, that specific backup file, no matter where you move it, is valid. It's going to be recoverable. So that's when the backup copy job comes in that we spoke about earlier. They can take that backup from your on-site disk, send it to NewCloud, send it to a tape, send it to your home office, send it wherever you want it to go that is off-site and also satisfies that offline variable. So that way you know that the data that you're moving has 0 errors. And that goes back to the 32110 part of that best practice rule. Okay, so very important concept. And the only other thing to mention around that's a very nice bonus, if you will, is you also have this whole concept of a sandbox. So in this isolated network that we create for you, you can actually spin up VMs on demand and use that like a testing environment. You can do simulations, trainings, patches. You can actually do that Windows update, make sure it's going to work before you go roll it to the rest of the environment, let's say. And also, if the whole ransomware thing hits, you might want to go through a few of your backups and make sure that restore point X and restore point Y were not actually impacted. So there's several different ways that that can be leveraged during such as an event as ransomware infestation. Right? It's also a very, very good practice, obviously, to do testing on your backups and make sure they're recoverable before you start going through the motions of moving them to different destinations. Now, like I said earlier, what happens when you actually have to recover? Veeam, last time we saw the infographic, we were up to 57 different ways that we can recover from a single backup file. So granularity is not a challenge. As long as you have a backup and you know it's valid, you verified it and there are no errors, you have several different ways that you can restore. Whether it's the full-blown virtual machine, we can actually do that in a matter of minutes, by the way, from your on-site backups. We can go inside the full VM and get to the application layer. So if you have things like domain controllers with AD, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, Oracle, we can actually crack open those workloads and extract out key items. So a user account from AD, a computer, maybe an Exchange email or calendar appointment, SQL database with log replay options, same with Oracle, also with SharePoint. Maybe you have a whole site you've got to recover in SharePoint. All that's built in as far as your granular restore options within Veeam. Now, we've got several different ways that we can leverage it. We integrate with a few different storage providers. You've got a list of those at the bottom left. So we've got HPE, we've got Nimble, we've got NetApp, we've got also some upcoming vendors too. If you want to keep in mind, some of the new ones come out in version 10. We're adding IBM and Pure's on deck as well. And basically what that enables us to do is do the instant VM recovery, where we can run that VM in just a few minutes. We can actually do that right off a storage snapshot as opposed to your Veeam backup. We can actually run this from a secondary target, and you could actually have, if you needed to pull from tape, you can recover a VM directly from tape, directly back into your inventory, and then boot it from there. So several different ways to recover the data, but also granularly. So if you've got the full VM, the application item, or maybe it's just a file. Maybe the whole idea is a folder of files that was encrypted, and that's all you need. Also, one-click restore right back into production with file level recovery. So very easy to do. Now, the other huge bonus of this is when we talk about Cloud Connect with backup, you can do all those granular restores directly from the NewCloud data center. So if you found yourself needing maybe a SharePoint site or a folder of files, like I just mentioned, and for whatever reason your on-site backups were infected, but your NewCloud Cloud Connect backups were safe, you can get that same granular restore functionality directly from the NewCloud data center. So very quick recovery, whether it's an application item, a file, a folder, anything like that that you could do on-prem, you could do directly from Cloud Connect as well. So it really opens up the door of possibilities on how to recover that data should it be infected. Now, everything that Veeam has been developing and innovating over the past decade has been laser focused around virtualization, whether it be VMware and Hyper-V. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen our recent show of Veeam On. We had a huge event down in New Orleans where we made some huge announcements, one of which is we now have a solution for physical Windows servers. So some of you on the call may haven't even heard that yet. So Veeam has always been a virtualization company as far as our target audience and target market, but we now have a solution specifically for physical Windows servers as well as physical Linux servers. So if you've got a mixed environment where you're not 100% virtual and you're also needing data protection on those physical Windows and Linux servers, we have a solution for that. So again, the agent for Linux you can install on any of those physical Linux boxes. You can do the on-site backup. Then you can do a backup copy job, like we spoke earlier about, and actually take that physical backup of Linux, also send it to Cloud Connect. So now not only are the virtual backups safe and secure off-site, now your physical backups are as well. Same thing with Windows. Same idea. You can actually have all those backups stored centrally at a single repository on-prem, and then from there pull what you need. If it's everything, great. If it's a subset, that's also fine. And transfer that backup data up to NewCloud so it's safe and sound. You've verified all that's recoverable before it goes, and you also have granular restores ready and waiting should something happen with ransomware or any other failure for that matter. You know, so just to summarize, guys, to give you some insights of what I personally have seen, you know, Veeam is all about data protection, but without recovery, data protection is only half the puzzle, right? And one of the important things to remember about ransomware is the whole idea is ransomware is locking data that is more than likely valuable and important to you, where if you don't have a solution in place ahead of time, you may be up against a wall and you have to pay. That's why it's so important to have Veeam in there with NewCloud and make sure that before any of this gets into your environment, because there are a number of vectors, like Ian said, there's all kinds of ways that it could make its way into your environment, and the best solution is to be protected up front. So you've got your Veeam backups, you've got them on site, you've verified they're recoverable, then you start diversifying. You send them to Cloud Connect over our Cloud Connect protocol with SSS and AES, or SSL and AES. You send them to a tape. You know, tape is still very relevant in the market. If you want the offline and off-site and you've maybe perhaps made an investment in tape already, Veeam supports that. So you can send that backup data that you've already verified is recoverable to your tapes and ship them off-site. So there's several different ways that Veeam helps get that data that has been verified recoverable off-site and offline, which is the key when you're looking at protecting against ransomware, is to have that air-gapped variable. And there's many other things that we can get into, but at this point, I'm going to pitch it back to you, Ian.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt, for going through that. So to sum it all up here, what we're going to do is go over just a little bit of a summary about what Matt just went over at a little bit of a higher level, let you guys know what our backup and disaster recovery solutions look like with Veeam to make sure you guys are completely protected, in addition to some of the other services that we can offer to help you guys avoid these issues in the first place. So as Matt mentioned, disaster recovery as a service. We don't expect all of you guys to be engineers and go out and implement this, although I know some of you are engineers on the call, so I'll translate it to I'll translate it on the sales level to kind of explain it to you. I really like the picture at the bottom of the screen here. It really sums it up pretty quickly what's going on. So on the left, we've got your on-premises infrastructure, your virtual machines, or now with the new Veeam Windows for Agent, as Matt mentioned, physical VMs or VMs living in an AWS environment. You've got Veeam there, and Veeam can send the replication jobs over the internet to our data center, to our cloud repository here. And it's all done encrypted, securely. There's WAN acceleration options. And once the replication jobs are here, that gives you the ability to stand them up and stand up an exact image of what those VMs are like on your site in the NewCloud data center. And it really gives you a full set of solutions that's really going to allow you to have that peace of mind and just be at ease to know that you can stand that infrastructure up on our side. So some of our differentiators against other disaster recovery as a service providers, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, are flexibility in our customization. So we treat every single customer as if it's a custom design, and sometimes I hesitate to use the word custom because people sometimes will associate dollar signs with customization, but it's exactly the opposite, in fact. By customizing it, we're fitting it to you, we're giving you exactly what you need, and you're not getting stuck into having a bunch of resources that you're never going to use. And we do that by using our solutions architect and all of our pre-sales to go in and make sure that we do a full discovery and give you guys exactly what you need, knowing what you have in your environment. And then after the fact, we have some of the best back office support in the industry. We have about 25 engineers, most of whom are Veeam certified, 24/7/365 support. So, disasters don't go home at 5 o'clock every day. They can happen in the middle of the night. So having that ability to use our support team if needed. And a lot of these reasons are why we enjoy a 95% customer retention rate. Once the services are here, they just work, and it allows the customers to trust us and know that their data is protected at all times. As far as the differentiator between going with a provider like us and building it on premises, it's essentially just avoiding the CapEx model and having to manage and maintain your own infrastructure. You can utilize the best-of-breed component and gear that we've already built at a low operating cost, and you don't have to worry about audits, compliances, redundancy, or any of that stuff. Another big feature there that Matt was talking about was getting it off-site and off-domain, right? I've got a lot of customers I've dealt with where they have 2 data centers today, so they've got redundancies, and they've got, it's far away, and they've got what appears to be a perfect setup. But they were attacked, and the attack not only hit their production data, but it also corrupted their backup jobs as well because it was on the same domain. By running it through Cloud Connect with us, it's all encrypted, it's off your domain, and a lot of customers are moving over to that type of solution to ensure that it is completely separate from their main location. So I mentioned our compliances, HIPAA, PCI, SOC 2 Type 1. For those of you who don't know, HIPAA essentially manages the personal healthcare information. PCI is personal credit card information. So what that means is we have to go through extensive audits and security audits to make sure that we take data protection and security very seriously, and that all of our hardware is always up to date, as well as software and processes. Our nationwide ultra-low latency network, we've got our 10 data centers around the country, so we can truly give you a backup and disaster recovery solution that's going to fit you no matter where you are, no matter what your environment looks like. And utilizing Veeam, we have a modern DR architecture, so users can define their recovery point objective and their recovery time objective. It doesn't matter if it's physical or virtual or cloud to cloud, whether you're in a public cloud, a hybrid cloud, or a private cloud, our solution with Veeam will have you covered. So I wanted to go over a quick kind of case study as well. It really speaks volumes when this is something that we've actually gone through with more than a few customers. It's not just an insurance policy that we run on the back end and then just hope that no one ever has to use it. These things do happen, and we do test these things regularly as well. So just to kind of highlight a customer we had recently, it's a not-for-profit customer who does care programs for adults and children. So if you're an in-home child care provider, or if you're giving care to an elderly adult. This company will help get you certified and get you actually meal plans through the government. So their data is very important because there's a lot of personal health care information. There's a lot of government contracts on there. They are always concerned about security. And unfortunately, what happened with this customer is a ransomware virus took control of an employee's desktop computer, and it went through the computer to the servers and corrupted the entire network, and it locked everything down to the point where they couldn't access any of their data. They were essentially crippled. And they got you've heard it on the news a million times, they get the message from the hackers saying, to get your data back, you've got to pay us an unreasonable amount of money in Bitcoin, which is an untraceable currency. And there are really no reports out there that shows that this even works, that if you pay the person, you're even going to get your data back. So it's extremely risky, and it's extremely scary when this happens. And because of the amount of personal healthcare information and all this data that they had on their infrastructure, if they didn't get this data back, it would have crippled the company. It would have resulted in millions of dollars worth of lawsuits and losses. And we were told by the owner that there was a good chance they wouldn't go back in business if they weren't able to get their data back. So luckily, we were working with the customer, and we had a backup and disaster recovery solution in place with Veeam. So we were able to quickly restore every single encrypted file and server quickly within our data center. None of their data was lost, and they did not have to pay that ransom, nor did they have to go through any revenue loss or anything like that. So in addition to protecting the company and thwarting the cyber attacks, we were allowing them to follow the best practice with the 3-2-1 rule, also now known as the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. Again, having 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, 1 of those copies off-site, 1 of those copies offline, and ensuring that there's 0 errors within those backups. So now is a great time to be looking at this solution. There's a massive promotion going on now between Veeam and NewCloud, where we're offering up to $2,000 of free Cloud Connect services. And what that means is you can try out the Cloud Connect backup, Cloud Connect replication, disaster recovery for up to $2,000 worth of services. And you can either, essentially it'll run till the end of the year, so you can use it until December 31st, 2017, or until the $2,000 runs out, whichever comes first. So it's a great time to kick the tires, to make sure it's a good fit for your company, do a proof of concept. I mean, never before have we been able to provide a product that we can stand behind so greatly because, you know, when we move production cloud environments over, it's not a simple switch. It's not something that we can easily go to a customer and say, hey, try it out for 30 months. You know, there's a lot of migration, a lot of moving parts. With Cloud Connect, it just works, and we can stand behind it, and we can build this environment for you and let you test it before you have to commit to anything. So it's quite easy to do so. All you have to do is set up a consultation with us. We are a platinum level Veeam cloud service provider. We were one of the initial 6 launch partners for their Cloud Connect services. So we have a very strong Veeam presence. We have a very strong relationship with them. You can go right to our website and register to get the coupon at info.newcloudnetworks.com/CloudConnect coupon request. And once you get that coupon code from Veeam, we can register it for you and get it locked in and ensure that you can get those free services. My contact info is here as well. I should have it on the invite. We've got Matt's info here also. If you've got any questions from a Veeam standpoint, both of us can answer anything you guys might have. And so that's where we're going to pass it back off to Sydney to do a little Q&A here. If you